The morning sun cast long shadows across Windsor Castle as Prince William stood before the ornate mirror in his private chambers. Today was different from any other day in his 41 years of life. The weight of destiny pressed heavily on his shoulders, not from the crown that would soon rest upon his head, but from a decision that had kept him awake for weeks. His fingers trembled slightly as he reached for the garment bag hanging beside his formal coronation robes. Inside was something that would shock the world, something that would make millions weep tears they never expected to shed. But William knew in his heart that this was right, even if tradition screamed otherwise. The coronation outfit that lay before him was not the expected military uniform adorned with medals and golden braids. It was not the ceremonial robes worn by kings for centuries. Instead, it was something far more personal, far more meaningful, and infinitely more controversial. 3 months earlier, William had made a discovery in the dusty archives of Kensington Palace. While searching through his mother's personal belongings that had been carefully preserved since her tragic death in 1997, he found a small wooden box tucked away behind old photo albums. His hands had shaken as he lifted the lid, revealing contents that would change everything he thought he knew about his coronation day. Inside the box was a handwritten letter from Princess Diana, dated just 2 weeks before her death. The letter was addressed to him, with instructions that it should only be opened when he became king. The words on that faded paper had brought him to his knees in the quiet archive room, tears streaming down his face as he read his mother's final wishes for his coronation day. Diana had written about her dreams for her son's reign, about how she hoped he would break free from the cold traditions that had suffocated the royal family for generations. She had included detailed sketches and notes about an outfit she had secretly commissioned, something that would represent not just the monarchy, but the people he would serve. The outfit was meant to be a bridge between the royal family and the common people, symbol of unity and understanding. The letter revealed that Diana had worked with a small, unknown tailor in East London, a man named Samuel Chen, who had immigrated from Hong Kong with nothing but his sewing skills and big dreams. She had visited his tiny shop in secret, disguised in simple clothes and a headscarf. Working with him to create something extraordinary, Samuel had kept the outfit safe all these years, never knowing if it would ever see the light of day. When William's private secretary contacted him 3 months ago, the elderly tailor had wept openly, remembering the kind princess who had sat in his humble shop, sketching designs and talking about her hopes for a better future. The outfit Diana had commissioned was unlike anything ever worn by British royalty. It was elegant, yet simple, regal, yet accessible. The jacket was made from wool, sourced from farms across the United Kingdom, with subtle embroidery featuring flowers from every corner of the Commonwealth. The pattern was intricate, but not flashy, representing the diverse communities that made up the modern British kingdom. What made it truly special were the small, almost invisible details that only those who looked closely would notice. Sewn into the lining were tiny pieces of fabric from clothes worn by ordinary British citizens who had made extraordinary contributions to their communities. A piece from a teacher's cardigan, a fragment from a nurse's uniform, a small square from a veteran's jacket, and dozens of others. Diana's letter explained that she had collected these pieces during her charity visits, always asking permission and explaining her dream. The people had been honored to contribute, understanding that their small piece of fabric would become part of something much larger, something that would represent their voices in the highest halls of power. As William held the outfit now, feeling the weight of his mother's love and vision sewn into every thread, he knew that wearing it would cause controversy. The traditionalists would be outraged. The media would have a field day. Some would call it inappropriate, disrespectful to centuries of royal protocol. But William also knew that this was exactly what the monarchy needed. For too long, the royal family had seemed distant and out of touch with the struggles of ordinary people. The recent years had been particularly challenging, with public opinion divided in younger generations. Questioning the relevance of the monarchy in modern society, the outfit represented everything Diana had stood for during her life. The compassion and connection she had brought to the royal role. It was her final gift to her son and to the nation, a way to ensure that her values would live on in his reign. William's wife, Catherine, entered the room quietly. Understanding the magnitude of the moment, she had been his strongest supporter. In the decision to wear the outfit, knowing how much it meant to him, and recognizing the powerful message it would send. Together, they had spent hours discussing the potential reactions and preparing for the storm of commentary that would surely follow. The palace staff had been sworn to secrecy, with only a trusted few knowing about the outfit's existence. Even William's father, now the former king, had not been told about the plan. This was William's decision alone, his first major act as the new monarch, and his way of honoring the woman who had shaped his understanding of what it meant to serve others. As he prepared to put on the outfit, William thought about all the people whose fabric was woven into its design. He thought about their stories, their struggles, and their hopes for the future. In a few hours, he would walk into Westminster Abbey wearing their contributions, carrying their voices with him as he took on the most important role of his life. The decision was made. There was no turning back now. The black Rolls-Royce carrying Prince William glided through the streets of London as thousands of people lined the route to Westminster Abbey. Union Jack flags waved enthusiastically, and the cheerful chatter of the crowd filled the morning air. Children sat on their father's shoulders, hoping to catch a glimpse of their new king, while elderly citizens remembered the last coronation they had witnessed decades ago. Inside the car, William sat quietly, his hands resting on his knees, as he watched his future subjects celebrate outside the window. The outfit he wore beneath his ceremonial cloak felt different from anything he had ever put on before. Each thread seemed to carry the weight of history, love, and hope that his mother had woven into her final gift. Catherine sat beside him, radiant in her own elegant attire, offering silent support with her presence. She occasionally glanced at her husband, seeing the mix of nervousness and determination in his eyes. She knew that in less than an hour, the world would witness something unprecedented in royal history. Back at the palace, Samuel Chen sat in the staff viewing area, having been secretly invited as William's personal guest. The 92-year-old Taylor wore his best suit, the same one he had worn to his grandson's wedding years ago. His weathered hands clutched a small photo of Princess Diana from the day she had first visited his shop, her smile bright as she examined the sketches they had created together. Samuel remembered that day clearly. Despite his advanced age, the young princess had seemed different from what he had expected. She had been warm, genuine, and deeply interested in his work. She had spent hours in his tiny shop, not as a royal patron looking down on a humble immigrant, but as a mother planning something special for her son's future. The media coverage outside the Abbey was intense, with reporters from around the world providing live commentary to billions of viewers. Royal experts discussed the traditional elements they expected to see, the centuries-old protocols that would be followed, and the symbolic significance of each ceremonial aspect of the coronation. None of them knew what was coming. Inside Westminster Abbey, the greatest names in British society had gathered. Prime ministers past and present, religious leaders, foreign dignitaries, and members of the aristocracy filled the ancient pews. The atmosphere was electric with anticipation and reverence for the historic moment they were about to witness. Archbishop of Canterbury stood ready at the altar, holding the crown that had been placed on the heads of monarchs for generations. The St. Edward's crown gleamed under the abbey's light, its golden surface adorned with precious stones that had witnessed the crowning of kings and queens throughout British history, but it was not the crown that would make this coronation unforgettable. As William's procession entered the abbey, the congregation rose to their feet. The sound of the choir filled the vast space with ancient hymns that had echoed through these walls for centuries. Television cameras captured every angle, broadcasting the ceremony to living rooms, pubs, and public squares across the Commonwealth and beyond. The moment of truth approached as William reached the altar and prepared to remove his ceremonial cloak. This was the traditional point in the ceremony where the monarch's coronation outfit would be revealed to the world.
Typically, this would be an elaborate military uniform or formal robes that emphasize the power and grandeur of the crown. William's
hands moved to the clasp of his cloak, and a hush fell over the abbey. Even the choir's voices seemed to soften, as if sensing that something extraordinary was about to happen. The camera zoomed in, capturing every detail for the millions watching around the globe. As the cloak fell away, gasps echoed throughout the abbey. The outfit beneath was unlike anything anyone had expected. Instead of golden braids and military decorations, William wore a beautifully tailored jacket and trousers in deep navy blue, with subtle embroidery that seemed to tell a story of its own. The embroidery was exquisite, but understated, featuring delicate flowers and symbols that represented every corner of the United Kingdom and the Commonwealth. Roses for England, thistles for Scotland, daffodils for Wales, and shamrocks for Northern Ireland were interwoven with maple leaves for Canada, wattle flowers for Australia, and silver ferns for New Zealand. But it was the overall simplicity and elegance of the outfit that struck everyone present. This was not the clothing of a distant monarch ruling from an ivory tower. This was the attire of a leader who understood that true authority came from connection with the people, not from displays of wealth and power. The television commentators struggled to find words, their prepared scripts suddenly irrelevant. Royal protocol experts looked confused, unsure how to interpret this dramatic departure from tradition. In living rooms across Britain, viewers leaned forward in their chairs, sensing that they were witnessing something historic. Catherine smiled proudly from her seat, remembering the conversation she and William had shared about this moment. They had talked about the courage it would take to break with tradition, and the importance of showing the nation that their new king understood the challenges facing ordinary families. The Archbishop of Canterbury continued with the ceremony, voice steady despite his own surprise at William's choice. The ancient words of the coronation service took on new meaning as they were spoken over a king dressed not in the costume of centuries past, but in clothing that seemed to bridge the gap between the throne and the people. In Samuel Chen's workshop in East London, his neighbors had gathered to watch the ceremony on his small television. When they saw the outfit their friend had created being worn by the new king, tears filled their eyes. They understood that this moment represented something profound about their community's place in the broader story of Britain. Social media exploded with reactions as viewers around the world tried to process what they were seeing. Hashtags began trending immediately, with millions sharing their thoughts about the new king's surprising choice. The conversations ranged from admiration to confusion to outrage, but no one could ignore the powerful statement being made. The ceremony continued, but everyone knew that this coronation would be remembered not for the traditional elements that had been repeated for centuries, but for the moment when a new king chose to honor his mother's vision of a monarchy that belonged to all the people. As the crown was placed on William's head, the weight of it seemed somehow lighter than expected, perhaps balanced by the knowledge that he wore beneath it the hopes and dreams of ordinary citizens whose small contributions had become part of something extraordinary. The crown now rested on William's head, but the real weight of his decision was just beginning to be felt across the nation. As the coronation ceremony continued with its ancient rituals and sacred oaths, television viewers in homes, hospitals, and community centers were having conversations that would change how they viewed their monarchy forever. In a small nursing home in Manchester, 87-year-old Margaret Thompson sat in her wheelchair, tears streaming down her weathered cheeks. She had lived through the reigns of 4 monarchs, but had never seen anything like this. The cardigan she had worn during her 50 years as a primary school teacher had been worn thin at the elbows from countless hours spent helping children learn to read. A small piece of that cardigan was now sewn into the lining of their new king's coronation outfit. Margaret remembered the day. Princess Diana had visited her school in 1995. The princess had spent the entire afternoon in Margaret's classroom, reading with the children and listening to their dreams for the future. Before leaving, Diana had quietly asked if she could have a small piece of Margaret's cardigan, explaining that she was working on a special project for her sons. "I want them to remember that their real strength comes from people like you," Diana had whispered, carefully cutting a small square from the inside seam where it wouldn't be noticed. "Teachers who shape young minds, nurses who heal the sick, workers who build our communities. You are the true foundation of our kingdom." Margaret had forgotten about that moment until 3 months ago when a letter arrived from the palace explaining, what was about to happen. Now, watching her new king take his oath of service while wearing a piece of her life's work, she understood the profound gift Diana had given to her son and to the nation. Similar scenes were playing out across the country. In Cardiff, Dr. Sarah Williams sat in the break room of the hospital where she had worked as a pediatric nurse for 30 years. Her colleagues had gathered around the small television, initially expecting to watch a traditional royal ceremony. Before returning to their shifts, instead, they found themselves witnessing something that spoke directly to their hearts. Sarah's nurse's uniform from her early days in the ward had contributed a small piece to William's outfit. She remembered Princess Diana's visit to the children's cancer ward in 1996. How the princess had spent hours sitting beside sick children, reading stories and offering comfort to worried parents. Diana had been particularly moved by 8-year-old Tommy, who was fighting leukemia with remarkable courage. Before leaving that day, Diana had approached Sarah privately. "The work you do here, the love you show these children and their families, this is what real nobility looks like," she had said, her eyes bright with unshed tears. "May I take a small piece of your uniform? I want to create something that will remind my sons that true leadership means serving others, especially those who need help the most." Now, as Sarah watched King William pledge to serve his people with humility and compassion, she felt a deep connection between that moment in the children's ward and this historic ceremony. The uniform she had worn while caring for Tommy and thousands of other young patients was now part of the fabric that would define a new era of monarchy. The reaction from the British public was immediate and emotional. Phone lines at the BBC were flooded with calls from viewers who couldn't believe what they were seeing. Many were crying, not from sadness, but from an overwhelming sense of recognition and inclusion that they had never felt before when watching royal events. In Scotland, retired police sergeant James MacLeod sat in his Glasgow pub, surrounded by friends who had come to watch the coronation together. James had served his community for 40 years, working the night shifts in some of the city's most challenging neighborhoods. His old police jacket had contributed threads to the king's outfit. It's a fact that still seemed impossible to believe. He remembered the night in 1993 when Princess Diana had made an unannounced visit to the community center where he was helping to organize a youth program. She had stayed for hours, talking with teenagers who had never imagined that royalty could be interested in their problems. Before leaving, she had asked James about his work, listening intently as he described the challenges facing young people in the area. "Your uniform represents protection and service," she had said, carefully taking a small piece from the inside pocket of his jacket. "Someday I hope my sons will understand that real authority comes from protecting those who cannot protect themselves." James watched the coronation now. Seeing William's commitment to service being sworn before God and the nation, he felt a pride that went beyond patriotism. It was the pride of knowing that his life's work, and the work of thousands of others like him, is being honored at the highest level of British society. The media struggled to keep up with the flood of reactions. Royal correspondents who had prepared traditional commentary about ceremonial protocols found themselves trying to explain something unprecedented. Phone interviews with constitutional experts were interrupted by emotional calls from ordinary citizens who wanted to share their connection to the historic moment. Social media platforms crashed temporarily under the volume of posts from people sharing photos and stories of their own contributions to the outfit. The hashtag Our King began trending worldwide as people realized that this coronation belonged to them in a way that no royal ceremony had ever belonged to the people before. In London's East End, the community around Samuel Chen's tailor shop had spilled out into the streets to watch the ceremony on screens set up outside local shops and restaurants. When the camera showed close-up shots of the embroidery work, the crowd erupted in cheers, recognizing the craftsmanship of their neighbor and friend. Samuel himself sat quietly in Westminster Abbey, overwhelmed by the culmination of a secret he had kept for nearly 30 years. He thought about Princess Diana's visits to his shop, how she had insisted on paying him not just for his work, but for his promise to keep the outfit safe until it was needed. She had understood that this moment would come, even though she would not be there to see it. The ceremony reached its most sacred moment as William knelt before the Archbishop, receiving the final blessings of his coronation. But unlike previous monarchs who had knelt in isolated grandeur, William knelt, wearing the contributions of his people, carrying their stories and their hopes with him into his reign. As he rose as King William V, the weight of the crown was balanced by the knowledge that he wore beneath it the threads of a nation's trust, woven together by his mother's love and vision for a monarchy that truly belonged to everyone. As King William V rose from his knees, the first person he looked for in the congregation was not a world leader or fellow royal, but the elderly man sitting quietly in the special guests section. Samuel Chin's eyes met those of the new king, and in that moment, 30 years of secrecy and waiting culminated in a shared understanding that changed both men forever. The recessional began. With William walking slowly down the aisle of Westminster Abbey, his crown gleaming under the ancient lights. But it was not the traditional regalia that captured the world's attention. Every camera focused on the simple elegance of the outfit beneath, and more importantly, on the completely transformed expression on the new king's face. Unlike the formal, distant demeanor expected of monarchs during ceremonial occasions, William's face showed genuine emotion. His eyes moved through the congregation, making contact with ordinary citizens who had been invited to witness this historic moment. These were not the usual dignitaries and aristocrats who typically filled royal events, but teachers, nurses, social workers, and community volunteers whose lives had intersected with Diana's charity work years earlier. Mrs. Helen Foster, a social worker from Birmingham, sat 3 rows back from the altar. She had dedicated her career to helping families in crisis, working in conditions that would have challenged the strongest spirits. 25 years earlier, Princess Diana had spent a day shadowing Helen through her work, visiting families struggling with poverty, addiction, and domestic violence. Helen remembered how Diana had insisted on entering every home, sitting on worn furniture, and listening to stories that most people in positions of power never heard. At the end of that long day, Diana had asked for a small piece of Helen's worn jacket, the one that had been through countless difficult situations but had somehow held together through everything. "This jacket has been where hope was needed most," Diana had said, carefully cutting a tiny square from the inner lining. "I want my sons to carry that hope with them always, to remember that their privilege means nothing unless it serves those who need help now." Watching William process down the aisle in his coronation outfit, Helen felt the profound connection between that difficult day in Birmingham and this moment of national celebration. The threads of her old jacket were literally woven into the fabric of the new reign, symbolizing a monarchy that would never forget its obligation to society's most vulnerable members. The international reaction was unlike anything seen before. At a royal coronation, world leaders who had attended expecting traditional pageantry found themselves witnessing something that redefined what modern monarchy could represent. President after president, prime minister after prime minister, stood and applauded not just the new king, but the vision he had chosen to embody. The German chancellor, herself the daughter of working-class parents, wiped tears from her eyes as she recognized the revolutionary nature of what she was witnessing. The French president, historically skeptical of monarchical institutions, found himself moved by the demonstration of leadership that chose humility over grandeur. But it was the reaction of the Commonwealth nations that proved most significant. In Canada, Australia, New Zealand, and beyond, citizens who had questioned the relevance of the monarchy in the 21st century suddenly saw something that spoke to their values of equality and community service. In Sydney, Indigenous leader Mary Tungara watched the ceremony with her grandchildren, pointing out the small Aboriginal symbols that had been incorporated into the embroidery of William's outfit. Princess Diana had visited their community in 1996, spending time learning about traditional culture and the ongoing struggles facing Indigenous Australians. She didn't come as a tourist, Mary explained to her grandchildren as they watched their new king take his oath. She came as someone who wanted to understand, who wanted to learn. She asked for a small piece of traditional fabric, saying she wanted to ensure that our voices would always be heard in the halls of power. The inclusion of Indigenous symbols from across the Commonwealth had been one of Diana's most important requirements for the outfit. She had understood that the modern monarchy could not ignore the historical injustices committed in its name, that true leadership required acknowledgement and healing. Back in Britain, the emotional impact continued to ripple across communities that had never felt connected to royal events before. In Liverpool, former miner Robert Davies sat in his local pub, staring at the television in disbelief. His mining helmet had contributed metal threads to the subtle trim on William's jacket. Representing the industrial heritage that had built Britain's prosperity, Robert remembered Princess Baron's visit to the mining community in 1992 during the worst of the pit closures that had devastated his region. She had not come with empty words of sympathy, but had spent days learning about the real impact of economic change on working families. She sat in my kitchen and listened to my wife talk about what it was like to not know if we could pay the mortgage, Robert told his friends in the pub, his voice thick with emotion. She asked about my helmet, said it represented the backbone of Britain. Now, watching our new king wear a piece of that helmet during his coronation, I finally understand what she meant. The ceremony concluded with the traditional fanfare and gun salutes, but the conversation that began that day would continue for years to come. As William and Catherine appeared on the balcony of Buckingham Palace, acknowledging the cheers of hundreds of thousands gathered below, the crowd's response was different from any royal celebration in living memory. These were not subjects paying homage to a distant monarch, but citizens celebrating a leader who had chosen to wear their stories as part of his identity. The cheers carried a quality of recognition and inclusion that transformed the traditional relationship between crown and people. Television commentators scrambled to find historical parallels, but there were none. No monarch in British history had chosen to incorporate the clothing of ordinary citizens into their coronation attire. No royal ceremony had ever so explicitly acknowledged the contributions of working people to the life of the nation. In the days that followed, newspapers and magazines around the world would publish detailed stories about each contributor to the outfit. The teacher whose cardigan represented education, the nurse whose uniform symbolized healthcare, the police officer whose jacket stood for public safety, and dozens of others whose small contributions had become part of something larger than themselves. But perhaps the most important reaction came from young people who had previously seen the monarchy as an outdated institution. Social media filled with posts from teenagers and young adults expressing surprise and admiration for a royal who had chosen to honor ordinary people rather than ancient traditions of privilege and separation. The coronation of King William V marked not just the beginning of a new reign, but the transformation of an entire institution, all through the power of a mother's love and a son's courage to honor her vision. 3 weeks after the coronation, impact of William's decision continued to transform British society in ways no one had anticipated. The palace mailroom was overwhelmed with letters from citizens across the Commonwealth, sharing their own stories of service and community involvement. What had begun as a single ceremonial choice had sparked a movement of civic engagement that surprised even the most optimistic observers. The story that emerged in the following days, as journalists investigated the origins of the coronation outfit, created an even deeper emotional connection between the monarchy and the people. When the full details of Princess Diana's secret project became public knowledge, the nation's understanding of both the late princess and their new king shifted dramatically. Samuel Chen, the elderly tailor who had kept Diana's secret for nearly 30 years, finally felt free to share the complete story. In an emotional interview with the BBC, he described the princess's visits to his humble shop in London's East End, revealing details that painted a picture of a royal who had been far more connected to ordinary people than anyone had realized. Would arrive without fanfare, usually in the evening when my shop was closed. Samuel explained, his weathered hands holding the original sketches Diana had made. She never acted like she was doing me a favor by visiting. Instead, she made me feel like I was helping her with the most important project of her life. The sketches themselves became part of a special exhibition at the Victoria and Albert Museum, allowing the public to see Diana's vision in her own handwriting. Her notes in the margins revealed her deep thought about every detail. This must represent hope, not just tradition. In every thread, should tell a story of service to others. The exhibition attracted visitors from around the world, many of whom left in tears after seeing the physical evidence of Diana's love for her son and her understanding of what the monarchy needed to become. The queues stretched for hours, with people willing to wait to connect with this tangible link to both Diana's legacy and William's historic choice. But perhaps the most profound impact was seen in communities across Britain, where Diana's vision had inspired a new generation of civic engagement. In Manchester, Margaret Thompson's nursing home had become an unexpected center of community activity. Young people, inspired by the story of the teacher's cardigan, began volunteering to read with elderly residents and learn about their life experiences. Before the coronation, these young people never would have thought to visit us, Margaret observed, watching a teenager help her neighbor with a puzzle. But somehow, seeing that my cardigan was worthy of being worn by the king made them realize that our stories matter too. Similar scenes played out across the country. The hospital in Cardiff, where Dr. Sarah Williams worked, saw a surge in volunteer applications from people who wanted to contribute to their community in meaningful ways. The Children's Cancer Ward, where Diana had spent those precious hours, established a new program connecting young patients with pen pals from around the world. The children light up when they receive letters, Sarah explained. Watching a young patient carefully read a card from a child in Australia, they understand that they're part of something bigger now, that their courage is inspiring people they've never met. The impact extended far beyond Britain's borders. In every Commonwealth nation, communities that had contributed to the coronation outfit became centers of renewed pride and engagement. The Aboriginal community in Australia, where Mary Tungara lived, experienced an unprecedented interest in their culture and traditions from both Indigenous and non-Indigenous Australians. For the first time, people are asking to learn, not just to observe, Mary explained, teaching traditional weaving techniques to a group of university students. They want to understand the stories behind the symbols that are now part of the king's outfit. It's created conversations that we've been trying to start for generations. The global media coverage had evolved from initial shock at the unconventional choice to deep admiration for its impact. International news outlets sent journalists to find and interview every person whose clothing had contributed to the outfit, creating a comprehensive picture of the diverse communities that made up modern Britain and the Commonwealth. These stories, when compiled together, revealed something remarkable about Diana's vision. She had not randomly collected pieces of clothing from people she met during her charity work. Instead, she had carefully chosen individuals whose life's work represented different aspects of service to society: education, healthcare, public safety, social work, military service, and community organizing. The result was a coronation outfit that literally embodied the foundations of a functioning, caring society. Every thread told a story of someone who had dedicated their life to making their community better. Their collective contributions had been woven together to create something that represented the very best of human nature. In schools across Britain, teachers began using the story of the coronation outfit as a starting point for lessons about citizenship and community service. Children who had never shown interest in current events found themselves engaged in discussions about how they could contribute to their own communities. The children understand it instinctively, explained teacher Jennifer Walsh from a primary school in Leeds. They see that the king values ordinary people doing extraordinary things in small ways every day. It's made them think about how their own actions matter, how they can be part of something bigger than themselves. The change was perhaps most visible in the relationship between the younger generation and the monarchy itself. Social media, which had often been critical of royal privilege and tradition, filled with posts from young people expressing newfound respect for an institution that had chosen to honor working people rather than ancient hierarchies. University students who had previously seen the monarchy as irrelevant began engaging with questions about leadership, service, and the role of symbols in society. Political science professors reported that enrollment in courses about constitutional monarchy and civic engagement had increased dramatically since the coronation. Students who used to dismiss the monarchy as outdated are now asking complex questions about how traditional institutions can evolve to serve modern values. observed Professor Emily Richardson from Oxford University. The coronation outfit has become a case study in how symbolic actions can create real social change. The transformation extended to the royal family itself. William's choice had not only changed how the public viewed the monarchy, but had inspired other members of the royal family to reconsider their own approach to their roles. Catherine launched a new initiative, connecting palace visitors with local community organizations. While other royals began incorporating more direct community engagement into their official duties. The coronation outfit, now carefully preserved in the Tower of London alongside the crown jewels, had become more than a piece of clothing. It represented a new understanding of what it meant to be a leader in the 21st century, and its impact continued to ripple through society in ways that would shape Britain and the Commonwealth for generations to come. 1 year after the coronation, King William V stood once again before the mirror in his private chambers at Windsor Castle. The anniversary of his mother's most profound gift to the nation had arrived, and with it came a decision that would complete the circle of her vision in a way that no one, not even Diana herself, could have imagined. The coronation outfit hung in its place of honor in his dressing room, but today William would not be wearing it. Instead, he had commissioned Samuel Chen, now 93 and still working despite his advanced age, to create something new. This time, however, the project belonged not to Diana's memory, but to the living legacy her vision had created. Over the past year, the palace had received thousands of requests from citizens who wanted to contribute to what had become known as the People's Wardrobe. Teachers, doctors, firefighters, social workers, and countless others had written, asking if they too could donate pieces of their work clothing to create outfits for future royal occasions. More significantly, the requests had come not just from Britain, but from every corner of the Commonwealth and beyond. A surgeon in Kenya, a teacher in rural India, a firefighter in Canada, indigenous leaders from 6 different continents, all had asked to be part of what had become a global symbol of service and community. William's decision was to create not just one outfit, but a complete wardrobe that would represent the international community of people dedicated to serving others. Each outfit would be worn at different state occasions throughout his reign, ensuring that the message of his coronation would continue to resonate year after year. The first of these new outfits was ready for today's ceremony, the official anniversary commemoration of his coronation. As William prepared to dress, he thought about the incredible year that had passed since he first honored his mother's vision. The changes in British society had been remarkable and lasting. Youth engagement in community service had increased by 300%. With young people citing the coronation as their inspiration, universities reported that applications for courses in social work, teaching, and public service had reached record levels. The economic impact had been equally impressive. Communities that had contributed to the coronation outfit experienced tourism booms as people from around the world came to visit the places that had helped shape their new king. Samuel Chen's neighborhood in East London had been transformed from a struggling area into a thriving cultural district, with his tailor shop becoming an unexpected pilgrimage site for visitors wanting to understand the story behind the historic coronation. But the most meaningful changes were personal and emotionally. Families across Britain reported feeling more connected to their country and their community than they had in generations. The story of ordinary people's clothing being woven into royal ceremony had broken down barriers that had existed for centuries. Between the monarchy and the people, Margaret Thompson, the retired teacher whose cardigan had been part of the original coronation outfit, had become something of a celebrity in her Manchester nursing home. But more importantly, she had become a bridge between generations, with young volunteers regularly visiting to hear her stories about decades of teaching and learning about their own potential for service. "I never imagined that my old cardigan would change so many lives," she said during a television interview on the anniversary. But Diana knew something I didn't understand then. She knew that when people see their own contributions valued at the highest levels, it changes how they see themselves and what they're capable of. Dr. Sarah Williams in Cardiff had established the Diana Memorial Children's Fund, using donations inspired by the coronation story to provide support for families dealing with childhood illness. The fund had already helped hundreds of families, creating a living tribute to the princess who had spent hours comforting sick children and their worried parents. Every time we help a family, I think about that day when Diana asked for a piece of my uniform, Sarah reflected. She told me that caring for others was the highest form of nobility. Now that principle is helping children and families every single day. The international impact had been even more profound. The Commonwealth. Nations had embraced the new model of monarchy with enthusiasm that surprised diplomatic observers. Countries that had been considering removing the British monarch as their head of state instead found renewed meaning in their connection to the crown. In Canada, Indigenous communities that had been contributing traditional materials to William's new wardrobe reported unprecedented interest from other Canadians in learning about their culture and history. The inclusion of their voices in royal ceremony had opened conversations about reconciliation and healing that had been needed for generations.
Ow.
When we see our patterns and our stories represented in the king's clothing, it tells our children that their heritage matters, explained Elder Joseph Crowfeather from Alberta. It's not just symbolic. It's a recognition that we are part of the fabric of this nation, literally and figuratively. Similar stories emerged from Australia, New Zealand, and across the Commonwealth. The Coronation outfit had created a template for inclusive leadership that was being studied and adapted by governments and organizations around the world. As William prepared for the anniversary ceremony, he reflected on a letter he had received the week before from a young girl in Wales, 10-year-old. Emma Davies had written to ask if her grandmother's apron could be included in a future royal outfit. Her grandmother had run a soup kitchen for homeless people for 40 years, and Emma wanted her service to be recognized. My gran says that serving others is the most important thing anyone can do, Emma had written in her careful handwriting. She has helped thousands of people, but she never gets any medals or awards. Could you please wear a piece of her apron so everyone knows how important her work is? William had immediately arranged for Emma and her grandmother to be invited to today's ceremony, and yes, a piece of the soup kitchen apron would be incorporated into his next ceremonial outfit. This was exactly the kind of recognition that Diana had envisioned, honoring the quiet heroes who made their communities better. Every day, the anniversary ceremony at Westminster Abbey was smaller than the coronation, but no less meaningful. The same spirit of inclusion and recognition filled the ancient building as William entered wearing his new outfit, created from contributions by citizens from 6 continents. This time, congregation included not just the original contributors to the coronation outfit, but their children and grandchildren, creating a multi-generational celebration of service and community. Samuel Chen sat in the front row, his great-grandson beside him, both watching as the tailor's life work continued to shape history. The outfit William wore today included threads from a Kenyan doctor's coat, Canadian teacher's sweater, an Australian firefighters' helmet lining, and dozens of other contributions from people whose lives were dedicated to helping others. Each thread told a story of service, sacrifice, and hope for a better future. But perhaps the most moving moment came when William spoke directly to the congregation and the millions watching around the world. His words were simple, but carried the weight of transformation that had occurred over the past year. My mother understood something that took me years to fully grasp, he said, his voice carrying clearly through the Abbey. She knew that true leadership means recognizing and honoring the contributions of every person who works to make their community better. The clothing I wear today carries the stories of teachers and doctors, firefighters and social workers, parents and volunteers from around the world. He paused, looking directly at the contributors seated before him. You have taught me that a crown means nothing unless it serves to lift up others. Your work, your dedication, your quiet acts of service every day, these are what make our communities strong and our nations great. As the ceremony concluded, William made an announcement that would ensure Diana's vision would continue for generations to come. The People's Wardrobe would become a permanent institution, with new contributions accepted every year from citizens across the Commonwealth who dedicated their lives to serving others. More importantly, a new tradition would begin immediately. Every year on the anniversary of the coronation, 100 young people from across the Commonwealth would be invited to the palace to meet with community. leaders and learn about opportunities for service in their own communities. My mother's gift to me was not just a coronation outfit, William explained. It was a vision of what leadership could become when it truly serves the people. Today, we ensure that vision will inspire young people for generations to come. As the ceremony ended and William walked once again down the aisle of Westminster Abbey, the same transformation was visible on his face that had marked his coronation day. This was not the formal distance of traditional monarchy, but the genuine connection of a leader who understood that his role was to serve, inspire, and uplift others. Outside the abbey, crowds gathered not as subjects paying homage to their king, but as fellow citizens celebrating their shared commitment to building better communities. The coronation outfit had done more than change how people viewed the monarchy. It had reminded an entire nation and much of the world that true greatness comes not from wealth or title, but from the daily choice to serve others. Princess Diana's final gift to her son had become the foundation for a new understanding of leadership, one that honored the contributions of ordinary people doing extraordinary things. The threads she had carefully collected and preserved had been woven into something far greater than a coronation outfit. They had become the fabric of a transformed society, one that recognized that everyone had something valuable to contribute to the common good. As the sun set over London that evening, millions of people across the Commonwealth went to bed feeling more connected to their communities and more inspired to make a difference in the lives of others. Diana's vision had not just survived her death, it had flourished, creating exactly the kind of world she had dreamed of for her sons and for all the people they would one day serve.